You think you stumbled upon this video by accident. You think the algorithm delivered it to your screen through some random computational process. You think you're just browsing, just passing time, just consuming another piece of content in the endless stream of digital noise that fills your days. But what if I told you that's not what's happening here at all? What if I told you that this moment, right now, you sitting here, your consciousness focused on these words, isn't random? What if every choice you made today, every click, every scroll, every seemingly insignificant decision was actually guiding you toward this exact convergence point in space and time? You were chosen to unlock this portal, not by me, not by some external force making decisions for you, but by the deepest, most intelligent part of yourself, the part that exists beyond the noise of your thinking mind, beyond the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what's possible. The part of you that remembers. Most people will watch this video and think it's about manifestation or quantum physics or some mystical concept they can intellectually understand and then file away. But you're here because something in you recognizes that this is different. This isn't information to be consumed. This is an activation waiting to happen. And the portal I'm talking about? It's not some doorway to another dimension. It's not a metaphysical construct floating somewhere in the ether. The portal is the shift that occurs when you finally stop living as if you're separate from the field of infinite possibility that surrounds you every moment of every day. Let me explain what no one tells you about how reality actually works. Every quantum physicist knows that consciousness doesn't just observe reality. Consciousness participates in the creation of reality. The observer effect isn't just some interesting scientific phenomenon happening in laboratories. It's the fundamental mechanism through which your awareness literally calls forth the experiences you have. But here's the thing that changes everything. Most people are unconscious observers. They're creating their reality through default patterns, inherited beliefs, and reactive responses to whatever seems to be happening around them. They're stuck in what I call the consensus trance, the collective agreement to pretend that life is happening to them rather than through them. You were chosen to step out of that trance. When I say chosen, I don't mean selected by some cosmic lottery system. I mean that your consciousness has reached a level of coherence where it's ready to remember something it temporarily forgot. You're ready to remember that you're not a victim of circumstance navigating a random universe. You're a conscious creator moving through a responsive field that reflects back to you exactly what you embody most deeply. This is where it gets interesting. The portal isn't something you find outside yourself. The portal is what opens when you finally stop looking for permission to be who you really are. When you stop waiting for conditions to change before you step into your power. When you stop pretending that the extraordinary isn't already moving through you in every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of conscious awareness. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone to recognize their worth, waiting for external validation that they matter, that they're capable, that they have something valuable to contribute to this world. But you weren't brought here to wait anymore. The moment you recognize that this conversation isn't happening by accident, that your consciousness drew this experience to itself because you're ready for what comes next, that's when the portal begins to activate. That's when you step out of the old story about being small, limited, separate from the creative force that moves through all things. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. When you stop living as if you're at the mercy of random events, everything shifts. When you recognize that your inner state, your emotional frequency, your beliefs about what's possible, your relationship to uncertainty and change, is literally broadcasting a signal into the quantum field, requesting experiences that match that vibration. Suddenly you understand why your life looks the way it does. And more importantly, you understand how to change it. This isn't about positive thinking or visualization techniques or any of the surface-level approaches that treat consciousness like a tool you use rather than the fundamental reality you are. This is about embodying a completely different relationship to existence itself. You are not a person having a spiritual experience. You are consciousness itself, temporarily focused through the lens of human experience, learning what it means to create in physical form. Let that sink in for a moment. Breathe into that recognition. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually, but in your cells, in your bones, in the very fabric of your being, you realize that asking, "How do I manifest what I want?" is the wrong question entirely. The right question is, what wants to emerge through me? Take a moment. What aspect of your true nature have you been keeping hidden that's ready to emerge? Share that below, because when you name it, you give it permission to become real. Because here's the truth that most people never discover. The universe isn't responding to your desires. The universe is your desires, the creative impulse that moves through you, the longing for expression and expansion and contribution. That's not separate from the force that spins galaxies and grows trees and orchestrates the perfect timing of every synchronicity you've ever experienced. You are that force, temporarily forgetting its own nature, playing at being limited so it can remember what it's like to transcend limitation. This is what the portal opens into. Not some fantasy realm where all your problems disappear, but a state of consciousness where you remember that problems are just invitations to grow. Where you remember that challenges are just the universe asking you to embody more of your true nature. Where you remember that everything, absolutely everything, is happening for you, not to you. But here's what no one tells you about stepping through this portal. It requires you to let go of the version of yourself that needs life to look a certain way. It requires you to release your attachment to specific outcomes and trust the intelligence that knows exactly what you need for your highest evolution. If this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Your consciousness is ready for more. Now back to what changes everything. This isn't passive surrender. This is active collaboration with the creative force of existence itself. And this collaboration requires something that most spiritual teachings miss entirely. It requires you to understand the quantum mechanics of consciousness itself. Because here's what scientists are discovering in laboratories around the world. Consciousness doesn't just influence reality at the subatomic level. Consciousness is the fabric from which reality emerges. When you observe a quantum particle, you don't just see it. You call it into a specific state of being. Before your observation, that particle exists in what physicists call superposition, simultaneously in all possible states, all possible locations, all possible expressions of itself. But the moment conscious awareness touches it, the wave function collapses, and infinite possibility becomes singular experience. Your life works exactly the same way. Right now, in the quantum field that surrounds you, there are infinite versions of your reality existing simultaneously. There's a version where you're already living your deepest purpose. There's a version where you've healed every pattern that keeps you small. There's a version where you're creating from pure inspiration, where abundance flows through you effortlessly, where your relationships reflect the love you've learned to have for yourself. All of these realities exist right now. Not as future possibilities, not as distant dreams, but as present potentials in the quantum field, waiting for your consciousness to collapse them into your lived experience. The portal isn't a doorway to somewhere else. The portal is the recognition that you are the consciousness that chooses which reality to experience from the infinite field of what's possible. But here's where most people get stuck. They think this choosing happens through their thinking mind. They believe they can visualize their way into a new reality or affirm their way into a different experience. And while these practices can be helpful, they're operating at the surface level of consciousness. The real choosing happens at a much deeper level. It happens through what you embody, through the frequency you broadcast, not just with your thoughts, but with your emotions, your beliefs, your cellular memory, your nervous system's default patterns. Let me explain how this actually works. Your consciousness is like a radio transmitter, constantly broadcasting a complex signal into the quantum field. This signal isn't just your thoughts, though thoughts are part of it. It's the totality of your inner state, your conscious beliefs and your unconscious assumptions, your healed traumas and your unresolved wounds, your moments of expansion and your contractions into fear. The quantum field receives this broadcast and reflects back to you experiences that match your dominant frequency. Not your preferred frequency, not the frequency you wish you were broadcasting, but the frequency you're actually embodying most of the time, in most situations. This is why positive thinking alone rarely creates lasting change. You can think positive thoughts while your nervous system is stuck in survival mode. You can visualize abundance while your cells carry the memory of scarcity. You can affirm your worth while your deeper beliefs whisper that you're not enough. The field responds to the totality of your signal, not just the part you're conscious of. But when you understand this, when you really grasp how consciousness and reality are interacting, everything becomes workable. Because suddenly, you're not trying to change your external circumstances. You're not trying to manipulate outcomes or control how your good comes to you. You're working directly with the source code of reality itself. You're learning to shift your internal state so completely that the field has no choice but to reflect back experiences that match your new frequency. You're becoming coherent at every level. Thoughts, emotions, beliefs, cellular memory, nervous system patterns, all broadcasting the same signal. This is what I call quantum coherence, and this is what stepping through the portal actually means. It means becoming so internally aligned with the reality you want to experience that experiencing it becomes inevitable. Not because you forced it into existence, but because you've become the type of consciousness that naturally attracts those experiences. But achieving this coherence requires you to work with parts of yourself that most people never even acknowledge exist. It requires you to heal not just your conscious wounds, but the trauma patterns stored in your nervous system. Not just your current beliefs, but the ancestral programming running in your cells. Not just your present identity, but the soul contracts you made before you even incarnated into this lifetime. This is deep work. This is the work that most spiritual teachers aren't equipped to guide you through because they've never done it themselves. They can give you techniques and practices and affirmations, but they can't help you reorganize your consciousness at the quantum level. And yet this is exactly what's required if you want to step through the portal permanently, rather than just catching glimpses of what's possible during peak experiences or meditation sessions. Let me tell you what this reorganization actually looks like. First, it requires what I call quantum presence. This is a level of awareness that can witness your own consciousness in real time. Most people live so identified with their thoughts and emotions that they can't see the patterns they're creating. They're inside the experience, swept along by whatever is arising, convinced that their reactions are justified by their circumstances. Quantum presence means stepping back far enough to observe the entire system, your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and the reality they're creating, from a space of loving neutrality. From this perspective, you can see how your internal patterns are calling forth your external experiences. You can see the loops you've been running unconsciously. You can see the places where you've been giving your power away. And most importantly, you can see the places where you're ready to choose differently. Second, it requires what I call cellular sovereignty. This is the capacity to heal and transform not just your conscious mind, but the patterns stored in your body. Because your cells are constantly listening to your thoughts and emotions, and they're storing information about what's safe, what's possible, what you deserve. If your cells carry the memory of rejection, betrayal, abandonment, scarcity, or trauma, they will continue broadcasting those frequencies no matter what your conscious mind is trying to create. Your nervous system will keep activating survival responses even when you're safe. Your body will keep recreating the chemistry of stress even when you're in peaceful environments. Cellular sovereignty means learning to communicate directly with your body's intelligence. Learning to release stored trauma through breathwork, movement, sound, and somatic practices. Learning to reprogram your nervous system to recognize safety and abundance as your new baseline. This isn't therapy. This isn't traditional healing work. This is quantum-level transformation of the vehicle through which consciousness expresses itself in physical form. Third, it requires what I call timeline integration. Because you're not just healing this lifetime's patterns, you're working with the quantum threads that connect you to all your experiences across all dimensions of time and space. Every choice you make sends ripples backward and forward through your entire existence. Every healing you complete doesn't just affect your present. It affects your past and your future simultaneously. Every pattern you transform changes not just your reality, but the reality of everyone you're connected to across all timelines. This is why some healing happens instantly and completely, while other patterns seem to take years to shift. You're not just working with linear cause and effect. You're working with the quantum mechanics of consciousness as it moves through multidimensional reality. And sometimes the resistance you feel to stepping into your power isn't even coming from this lifetime. Sometimes it's coming from other versions of yourself that learned it wasn't safe to be powerful, to be seen, to be fully expressed. Sometimes the fear of success is actually a memory of when success led to persecution. Sometimes the fear of love is actually a cellular memory of when love led to betrayal. Timeline integration means learning to heal across all dimensions of your existence simultaneously. Learning to gather the fragmented parts of your consciousness from wherever they've been scattered and bring them home to the present moment, where transformation is possible. This might sound complex, and at one level it is. But at another level, it's the most natural thing in the world. Because this is what consciousness does. This is how consciousness heals and evolves and expands. This is how the universe learns about itself through the experiences of individualized awareness. You don't have to figure out how to do any of this with your thinking mind. You just have to be willing to surrender to the intelligence that already knows how to orchestrate your perfect healing and awakening. You have to be willing to trust the part of you that chose to incarnate into this particular lifetime, with this particular set of challenges and gifts, because it knew exactly what experiences would catalyze your greatest evolution. You have to be willing to trust that everything that has happened to you, everything that is happening to you, and everything that will happen to you is part of a perfect curriculum designed by your own higher intelligence to help you remember who you really are. This trust isn't naive optimism. This isn't spiritual bypassing that pretends difficult experiences don't matter. This is quantum-level recognition that consciousness is always working for its own expansion, always creating the exact conditions necessary for its next level of awakening. And you are that consciousness. You are not a victim of your experiences. You are the consciousness that chose your experiences because they would give you the exact opportunities you needed to discover your infinite nature. When you truly understand this, when you feel this in your bones rather than just thinking it with your mind, something fundamental shifts in how you relate to everything that arises in your life. Challenges stop feeling like obstacles and start feeling like invitations. Difficulties stop feeling like punishment and start feeling like opportunities to embody more of your true nature. Relationships stop being about getting your needs met and start being about discovering what love actually is when it's not conditioned by fear or attachment. This is what it means to live from the other side of the portal. This is what it means to be awake in a world where most people are still dreaming that they're separate from the creative force of existence. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more awake you become, the more compassionate you become toward those who are still asleep. Because you remember what it's like to believe you're small and powerless. You remember what it's like to wait for someone else to save you or change your circumstances or give you permission to be happy. You remember, and instead of judging, you become a living demonstration of what's possible when consciousness remembers its own nature. You become a lighthouse, broadcasting a frequency of awakened awareness that helps others remember their own capacity for transformation. Not through preaching or teaching or trying to convince anyone of anything, but simply through being so genuinely yourself that others feel safe to be genuinely themselves. This is how consciousness awakens on the planet. Not through mass conversion or spiritual movements or any external organization, but through individual consciousnesses choosing to step through the portal into their own awakening, and in doing so, making it easier for everyone else to make the same choice. Because awakening is contagious. When you stop apologizing for your light, you give others permission to stop hiding theirs. When you start living from authentic power rather than learned helplessness, you help others remember their own strength. When you begin creating from love rather than fear, you contribute to the field of possibilities that everyone is drawing from. This is the ripple effect that most people never understand. They think their inner work is private, personal, separate from the collective experience. They think their healing only affects them. Their transformation only changes their individual reality. But consciousness is not individual. Consciousness is a unified field expressing itself through billions of apparent points of awareness. When you shift at the deepest level, when you genuinely step through the portal into a new way of being, you create what quantum physicists call non-local effects. Changes that ripple instantaneously across the entire field, affecting everyone and everything connected to you. And in the quantum field, everything is connected to everything else. Every choice you make, every healing you complete, every moment you choose love over fear sends waves of coherent energy throughout the entire web of existence. You become a tuning fork for awakened consciousness, helping others remember their own frequency of truth. This is why you were chosen for this moment. Not just to transform your own life, but to contribute to the quantum shift that's happening in human consciousness right now.